Everyone, and welcome to the second quarterly State Advocacy Team conference call. We appreciate everyone getting on the phone call today. We are recording it. We will post it later, and please send in your questions in the chat box. I see so many great states represented today. This is wonderful. We have a very wide variety of states, all the way from the East Coast to the West Coast. And I see that ACTFL President Dessa Dawson's on the line from Oklahoma. So welcome everyone again. This is Marty Abbott. I'm Executive Director of ACTFL, and we are pleased to be providing you today with some updates on advocacy and some ideas, and to hear from you all about what you're doing in your states as well. We're going to start out today with a federal update from our colleagues at the Sheridan Group, Jill Allen Murray and Matt Schlesinger. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Jill and Matt.
Hey everybody. So not a ton has changed with regard to our federal priorities and specifically Title 4A since our last call. A lot of people here in DC, specifically in Congress, that they're focused on things like tax reform. They're focused on whatever the crazy news of the day is. So not too much has changed on this front. But I thought I would just flag a couple of things for you all. There's been a lot of concern by many in the education field by some of the changes that Secretary DeVos has made to Department of Ed regulations and to Department of Ed guidance. But fortunately, she announced, or the department announced last week, that they are not going to withdraw the guidance they put out last year for Title IV. This was personally a big relief, because it would have, had they withdrawn the guidance, it would have rendered a lot of what was previously a bit moot. But the guidance that we've discussed a few times on these calls before is still applicable and still good. So very good news on that front. The other thing I wanted to talk about is, we spent a lot of time recently discussing appropriation levels and the way you go about obtaining funds through these SSAE grants for a well-rounded education. I just wanted to give everybody a reminder on what those funds can be used for once they eventually do make it to your LEA. So districts that receive an allocation above $30,000 need to do a needs assessment. This needs assessment can be done with the help of a very helpful tool that ACTFL has on their website. It's a metric tool for that helps you create this needs assessment and fill it out. And I really identify what type of language learning programming your district might need. So for districts that fall in that bucket that receive more than $30,000, 20% of that must go to a well-rounded education. That's really what we're focused on. That's the Student Support and Academic Enrichment Grant. As we've discussed in the past, those can go really towards anything from languages to music, art, phys ed, APs. They really drafted this law trying to give as much power as possible to states and localities. So chances are, if you can think of it, you can use it. You can use these funds for it, which just means a little bit more competition for the funds from the language community. The balance of the funds under Title 4A, 20% will have to go to safe and healthy school programming, and the remaining 60 can be split among the first two priorities, so well-rounded education, safe schools, and then also technology. So there's some flexibility there. If you're in a district that receives less than $30,000 in your grant, then it's a little bit more of a free-for-all. You can really spend those funds in any of the three buckets how you see fit. And with that, I'm going to turn over to Jill just to give you more of a 30,000-foot view of the appropriations status.
Yeah, so I would just echo what Matt has said on the breakdown so that it's clear, the 20%, 60%. That the 20% on well-rounded is a floor, not a ceiling. So that third bucket allows you the flexibility to continue at the local level to add additional funds on top of that. So I don't want anybody to see the visual and think, oh, it's only 20%. That is not the case. Okay. So in terms of our federal update, this can be rather speedy. Not a whole lot has changed right now. For those of you who are paying attention to the national news, certainly everyone is consumed with the Mueller investigation, but there's a ton of discussion, at least from the majorities in Congress, and focus on tax reform. So that is the legislative goal of the majority party in both the House and the Senate at this moment in time, and the president as well. So they're putting sort of all their eggs in one basket and not paying any attention really to the appropriations process, where normally at this time in the year you would have quite an emphasis put on trying to strike those end of year negotiations. They do need to reach agreement on the budget caps, which are the first step in this process, and we've often referred to this as the budget, sort of alleviation of the caps imposed by the Budget Control Act. That conversation really we expect to come from leadership. Again, there's no indication that McConnell, Schumer, and Ryan and Pelosi are having conversations about that. Once they get there, then the appropriators will have the ability to break out the different funding levels under each bill, but they got to establish that top line number first. So we don't expect, so right now, as you can see on the slide, the continuing resolution that funds the government does so until December 8th. We do not expect Congress to meet this deadline, and they will again kick the can down the road, very likely into the next year. It's possible they could do what they've done in years past, which is kick it to March, because they really have not done a lot of their work. Matt and I have talked to appropriators who indicate, look, if we get our top line number, we can do our work in actually a very little amount of time. But we don't hear that going on right now. So just, be on the lookout. But that is important for us for Title IV-A, because the overall spending level for that program, we want to see it increased. And ACTFL, as a active voice in the Title IV-A coalition, has been encouraging Congress to increase that spending so that there's more money that can come to the schools for this program at the local level. What it looks like right now is that the funding level will be somewhere between $450 million and $500 million. As you may recall, the goal for that program, the authorized level, was $1.65 billion. So we'd certainly much rather see it a lot higher, and because it goes to all states and has to filter down, it really needs to be a higher number. Because of this, we're likely to see state-run competitions again. So, I think we want to reiterate that when it comes to federal advocacy with ACTFL at the national level, when we're engaged on Title IV-A, funding level, also some other issues that we've been working on, we cannot say enough how important it is to have voices from home states be willing to reach out and talk to members of Congress on our behalf. And we've actually done it a little bit recently. DESA's been a great voice with Congressman Cole, Chairman Tom Cole, on this, and that's been a really important component to our Title IV-A coalition work. Also some work on the Defense Appropriations Committee, which he sits on. She's just a good example. We've got a few other members, ACTFL members, who have done this work as well. But what we want to just suggest to you is that, if you're willing to do this work, and it doesn't take a whole lot, very often what we'll do is say, hey, we need someone in the state of Oklahoma, or we need someone in the state of Rhode Island to reach out to their senator. We've got a templated message that we want you to send, and Marty or Trey will send it on to you and say, could you send this to this particular staff member? And it makes such a difference. Matt and I go in and have these meetings, and then what we get? We get yeses to our request. So if you're willing to do this work, if you could email Trey and let him know that you want to be added to that list, we'd really appreciate that. So thanks so much for your continued support and interest in this, and I'll turn it back to the ACTFL team.
So we'd like to discuss a little bit about our upcoming Assembly of Delegates, and I know that many of you are planning to be there, so I just wanted to highlight the agenda, which is posted on the ACTFL website, and we will be providing a much more detailed agenda, of course, when you get to the convention. But I just wanted to talk about some of the major areas that are happening nationally that we'll be talking about. And the first one is, of course, our national crisis with teacher recruitment and retention. And Dessa, as our president, will be leading the Assembly of Delegates. We will have a special guest, Richard Ingersoll from the University of Pennsylvania. He's a national expert on the issue of teacher recruitment and retention. So we'll look forward to hearing from him. And then, of course, you'll have time in your small groups to talk about what this means for your organization and to identify some steps in moving forward. We will also be talking about the recommendations of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences National Report, America's Languages, Investing in Language Education in the 21st Century. And again, we'll be talking about some examples of people who have implemented these recommendations, and then you'll have time in your groups to talk about what this means for your organization and how you all can help move these recommendations forward. We'll also be talking about the brand new, I'm sure you've seen them, can-do statements. We revised the can-do statements as well as provided the intercultural communicative can-do statements, and so those are on the ACTFL website, and we'll be talking with, we're hearing from some of the people who actually were on the task force about ways that you can implement those can-do statements as well. And then we always like to showcase what our organizational members are doing, so we'll be hearing from some of our organizational members who have really put a focus on developing proficiency in students, and hear from them about some of the ways that they've been implementing proficiency-oriented instruction in their particular states. I also wanted to just take a moment and highlight some of the other ways that ACTFL engages in advocacy work for you all, and Matt made a reference to some of the issues that are going on here in Washington with the current climate, actually all over the country. And so you probably know that as early as last November, the ACTFL issued a position statement on the role of language learning in valuing diversity and promoting unity, and that can be found on our website. And then in February, the executive committee made a statement about pledging commitment to linguistic, cultural, and religious diversity. And then as late as just this August, we issued a statement on the recent events in Charlottesville and made the ACTFL publication, Words and Actions, Teaching Languages Through the Lens of Social Justice, available in the e-version gratis for anyone who wanted to download that book to use in class to work, especially with students, on some of these issues. And we remain committed to being active in many different ways, especially in some of the ways that states have implemented discrimination laws. So we actually have become a member of Tennessee Thrives, which is over 300 businesses in the state of Tennessee that are working to show their disapproval for discrimination law in the state of Tennessee. We've also been very active in the state of Texas with their Senate Bill 6, which is also known in other states as the bathroom bill, and they have deferred that decision on that that legislation until 2019. And of course, that's in anticipation of ACTFL being in San Antonio in 2020. So we want to make sure that we're taking action in the states where we hold our conventions against any kind of discrimination activity within that state. So we're going to move on now to our next topic, which has to do with the state of the states. So we'll be looking forward to hearing from some of you, and I'm going to turn it over to Trey Calvin, our Education Department Program Coordinator.
Thanks, Marty. Hi, guys. It's Trey. I just want to touch on a couple of opportunities that are out there right now, in case you haven't heard from them about them yet, of ways that you can proactively and publicly advocate for languages outside of your own classroom. So what we've been seeing over the last 3 or 4 years now with the Seal of Biliteracy is it's becoming the new sort of public face for language learning outside of the classroom. One of my colleagues in another state that's working on a pilot program related to me one of the arguments that she put forth to her senators of why they needed this program. When you go to a high school graduation and your young daughter or son is graduating senior and he's being recognized to everybody there, his teachers, his community, the religious community, family members are there. She said, you know, athletes get up there and they're promoted for their abilities and their skills. The Honor Society kids are promoted for their smarts and their achievements. We want the seal of biliteracy because we want to promote diversity, we want to promote multiculturalism, we want to promote the benefits of multilingualism. So the seal of biliteracy is taking on, in terms of the news that I'm digesting every day from all over the country, it's taking on a bigger value outside of the classroom. And I can't stress enough how important it is to get involved in this if you haven't already. And there's a couple ways that you can do this, which I'll talk about in our next slide. It's just about getting on top of pilot programs if you haven't started one already, linking up with your state's working group if there's a coalition already, like there is in Massachusetts. But another one of the opportunities that's out there that I've been reading about and just sort of hearing from every state is dual language immersion programs are being demanded by parents. In a time where there's budget shortfalls all across the country, dual language immersion programs continue to be the topic of conversation, and parents continue to want more money for this. So in terms of that, Marty can give us a little bit more information about what she's done with Title III and who she's been working with to give us a little more idea about the funding of it.
Sure. Just last week, Jill Allen Murray and I met with Jose Viana, who's the new director of the Office of English Language Acquisition, OELA, at the Department of Education. And we reiterated to Jose how important it is that Title III funding be available for English learners who are in dual language two-way immersion programs, that is an appropriate use of the funding of Title III, and it should be made available. Of course, it's up to each state how they allocate those funds, but it's important as language educators that we know that we should be speaking up for use of Title III funds for English learners who are in dual language immersion programs. So he promised to try to make that a little bit clearer. We've asked before. He's new in his position, so it's always good to ask again, and we'll keep you posted on what the Department of Education says about the use of those Title III funds.
Thank you, Marty. This is what I was speaking of a little while ago about what actions and what steps you can take right now to jump on these opportunities that are available to you. Places like Massachusetts right now have been utilizing the internet and their coalitions to build forums where they can talk about specific parts of the seal, that the details that they need to hash out. I've been following their forum. MAPLA also has a bunch of resources online through their website. They've recently partnered with their SEAL working group, is what they're calling it. It's a coalition between the foreign language educators there and the English language learning community. They've released a toolkit that sums up a lot of the work that 20 plus states have already gone through. So I would really encourage you, if you are getting on to promoting the SEAL, even in your school or in a bigger setting, I would really recommend that you look at their toolkit. It's very useful. There are some smaller states out there that ACTFL has been working with, namely, I see Megan Hambrick from Montana is on the call right now. We had a conversation last week about developing a pilot program just to get started. I think when people come to me and they ask me, what can we do? It seems like there's so many options. Well, one of the things you've got to remember is that results really matter. If you can't count it, it doesn't count. Having a small pilot program of even a few kids once a year can start to grow year after year, and that recognition, if you're recording it, makes for really powerful advocacy when you're trying to push it either through legislation or through the Department of Education. So if you're thinking about starting a SEAL program and you need some advice, please give me a call. I'd love to help work you through the process and talk about some things that we've done in the past that have been really successful. And the last thing I'll say about the opportunities you can take is just don't be shy. Attend events. You know, members of your representatives live in communities just like the rest of us. They go to church, they attend their children's soccer games, they have events, and they sponsor even educational events of their own. If you run into them, don't hesitate to introduce yourself or reintroduce yourself and talk about what organization you represent. A familiar face is always going to be a potential ally when we're asking for or fighting for the programs that we want. So one of the things that we always try to promote, in case you have already a SEAL or you really don't know where to get started with your advocacy goals, ACTFL, in conjunction with state associations, have come up with our 10 advocacy goals that Marty and I are going to walk you through really quickly. And yes, we do have resources for these, so you're not starting from scratch. So there's 10 of them. We'll go through them quickly. Marty, would you like to start us off?
Sure. Anytime you can get your elected officials, even if it's just a school board, to create a proclamation in support of language education, that's beneficial. It gets them thinking about the importance of language learning. We do have a sample up on the website, and we also, in conjunction with our Lead with Languages campaign, are dedicating next February, as Lead with Languages Advocacy Month. So we'll be back in touch, but that would be a great month to get a proclamation, and we'll have some samples, additional samples for Lead with Languages up on the website by then.
You can always arrange for a meeting with your state legislative or congressional representatives. Building relationships is the most important building block of advocacy. It's really not difficult to set up a meeting, and it can pay super big dividends. It's really important to build these relationships because we want your representatives to view you as the authority on foreign language education and your organization as being an integral part of the conversations they have to create legislation that continues our advocacy work. Also, a really important part of this is photo ops sell. So if you're having a hard time getting a meeting, try to think about putting a public face on it, like a recognition event. Let's say if you're handing out sealed biliteracies, or if this is a graduation event, they would be happy to come and visit your school.
Very important is having someone at your State Department of Education to be an advocate for languages. And so we have a step-by-step process that we've posted on the website on how to get a state supervisor, how to go about it. Rhode Island was recently fairly successful. They had a couple of steps backwards, but I think they're still trying to move forward and getting someone designated at the State Department of Education. So check out the steps there that we have on the website, because that is a really great advocacy goal for your state org if you are looking for something to focus on this year.
Yeah, these are the steps we're talking about here.
National board certification. Some states with troubling budgets have done away with stipends for national board certified teachers. That's a great advocacy goal, to go back to your state legislature and ask them to reinstate stipends so that you can promote national board certification. Some states have actually gotten their legislators to issue a proclamation promoting early language learning, to encouraging long sequences for languages. And Illinois was recently very successful at getting their state to designate a certain recognition for students who are transitioning from high school to post-secondary institutions that have the seal of biliteracy. Some states have done this with students who get certain scores on the advanced placement or the international baccalaureate test. But establishing some kind of articulated recognition for students going to universities in your state is always a great goal to have. We hope every state has a Teacher of the Year program. I think all of you know what a great advocacy program it is to have someone who is serving as a spokesperson for your organization. And people with a title can easily get an appointment with a legislator or someone that you want to advocate with. So if your state has a Teacher of the Year program, you need to use that person as an advocate to get a meeting with the governor, to get a meeting with your state legislature, to have that person speak to them. It's very easy when the person has that title. And it's always a good idea to check out the candidates who are running for public office in your area and see how they stand on your issues. You can give them a survey and ask them to fill it out and to speak to the issues of language education and its importance. Many states are trying hard to get legislation passed for a high school graduation requirement. Currently, we only have about 16 states in the U.S. that have any kind of a high school graduation requirement. Some states have more than one high school diploma. One of the diplomas may require language credits, but the other may not. So this is a great goal. It's a tough one to get implemented, but states have been successful at having this happen.
And one of the things that we're seeing right now is the exact opposite of this goal, I think, Marty, is this push in a lot of states right now. I count about 3 or 4 that are trying to replace or substitute foreign language classes with computer literacy or coding courses, what they're commonly referred to. Those states that come off the top of my head are Florida, which is going to be in its 4th year of trying to substitute and or replace foreign language credits with computer science, and Michigan and Wyoming. There are still some time before the next legislative session comes up, and we expect to see some more bills like this, but please stay tuned. Finally, what we've talked a lot about in every advocacy call is developing a sealed biliteracy program in high school, and I don't need to emphasize how important this is to, as a public-facing sort of values-based initiative for language learning in the United States.
Just want to remind everybody, too, that we have the CapWiz feature that can work for your state legislature. So if you have a bill coming up in your state, and we've done this with the states, especially who have introduced the computer coding as a substitute for a language requirement, we can set up the CapWiz so that the people in your state can write directly to your state legislators. So please don't forget that option when you're facing a state bill, and Trey can certainly help you set that up.
Absolutely, and one of the things that we do there in CapWiz is get your message out to a bigger audience at the state level. One of the things that comes to mind as we're going through these 10 goals, though, is there might be one that stands out to you, but you really, even with all the resources that we have online, you might not be feeling really well equipped. Reach out to me, because we know people who have accomplished each one of these goals, and we'd love to connect you with them. They would love to help you out as well. With that, I am going to find Chris Moorhead, who is FLAM's past president.
Foreign Language Association of Missouri.
Thank you. And just give me one moment. Chris is, I know he's on there, but he can't talk because I got him muted.
I just unmuted myself. Is that okay?
Hey, how are you, Chris?
Yeah, we're doing well. Thank you.
Good. I was hoping you and I would have a little conversation about what you've been doing in Missouri recently as passed the seal biliteracy. And if you could give us a little information about what's been going on.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're really excited that this past weekend was our state foreign language conference, and we celebrated our State Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, we refer to it as DESE, recently agreed to put forth a seal of biliteracy for our state. And so we've been celebrating that, and it's been a long process for us. It's been a 2.5-year process in the making, and
Wow.
very challenging along the way. We've had a lot of challenges, but we've overcome quite a few of those, and we finally got to the end result that we wanted. So
You said that DESE, or the Department of Education in Missouri, was the route that you took, and a lot of people out there know that you can also take a legislative route. Why did you decide on the Department of Education as a way to implement the seal?
yeah, you know, initially we did take a legislative route. We started down that path. We had found some allies in our state legislature. We found a representative who actually was a former Spanish teacher, and we built a relationship with her and said, hey, we've got this thing we'd like to try. Would you support it for us? And she said, yeah, and I've got people that can support that bill on both sides of the aisle. So we headed down that direction, and we found out fairly quickly that the political climate in our state was very hostile towards making that possible. So we backtracked and decided that we'd try a different route and went through the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. We initially began with simply a letter campaign to the State Department of Education asking our members and superintendents, and I believe even ACTFL helped us out. We got a letter from Marty saying that the seal of biliteracy is something that we want to have happen. And once we finished our letter campaign, we set up meetings with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education to see if they would listen to what we had to offer.
So, you mentioned the Department of Education. I remember talking to you in the past, and you said that one of the biggest, what made this turn into a landslide after 2 years was getting that connection within the Department of Education. Can you talk a little bit about how important that was?
Yeah, I always joke about having been the president that wherever I was headed, I was always shaking hands and kissing babies. But the reality of that is that you're building relationships when you're doing so. And we had the privilege of, we had a world language coordinator at DESE, and then that person left the Department of Education, and we needed another language coordinator to take on our cause for us. And it just so happened that the person who was a coordinator for English language learners at the state level also met with us and decided that they would take on the hat for world languages. So we built a relationship with ELL, and by bringing ELL into the fold and having that one person who's overseeing ELL and world languages, that was really beneficial for us to have built that relationship with that person and that individual at the state level.
That's what I hear too, is that coalition building is probably the most important part about getting things moving. Can you talk a little bit about, who was part of the coalition? How did you first reach out to them? How did you get started?
Yeah, it really is all about meeting people. When we initially started to develop our coalition, of course, the Foreign Language Association of Missouri was involved, but we wanted to involve other people. And by reaching out into the ELL world, we were able to get the Missouri Dual Language Association on board, the Dual Language Area Network. So that's a group of schools throughout Missouri that have dual language immersion programs. We got them on board with us, and as a result of that, then we reached out to universities to ask if they would support the seal of biliteracy. And then we also asked companies if they would help to support the seal of biliteracy. So by building this coalition, I think it really helped to move our cause forward.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that strikes me in terms of Missouri coming in nationally a little late, I guess, or just in time, I would say, but they're coming in with something that not a lot of other states have with the seal of biliteracy, and that is college credit that comes along with it. You advocated successfully, I might add, for this college credit. There must have been some conversations you had to have with universities and colleges around there. How did you get that started? How did you start those conversations?
Yeah, so we approached all of the state universities at the state level. We haven't yet reached out to the private universities in our state, but we wanted to talk to the state university system and see if we could get those universities to agree that if a student achieved the seal of biliteracy for the state of Missouri and reached a certain level of proficiency, if they would agree to offer college credit for that prior learning. And to be honest with you, most universities already have this system in place. If a student performs well on a certain assessment, and they will grant credit to those students. So we felt like asking the universities to grant credit to those students with a seal of biliteracy wasn't any different than what they were already doing. It was simply just maybe taking out one or two steps for that particular student. So the fact that they already do this at their institutions was really a pretty easy ask on our part. And several universities have already signed on and said, yeah, we can absolutely do that. We're still in conversations with other universities throughout the state, trying to get them to come on board as well. We met with several of the department heads of those universities at our conference this last weekend, and I'll be making follow-up conversations in the weeks ahead.
That's great. One of the things that comes up in conversations when you talk to legislators and educators is repeating the refrain here: college and career readiness, college and career readiness. Tie this into that, we can really convince people of its value. So you talked just a second about business endorsements. You reached out to the local community. How effective has that been in convincing the larger community that this is important?
I think from a legislative perspective, one of the things that works well when you're talking to a government official is dollars and cents. And so what we tried to do when we initially introduced the Seal of Biliteracy to our state government was we wanted to talk about the impact that languages had financially on the state of Missouri. So we did a lot of digging and did a lot of research and put together several talking points about how much Missouri depends on languages from a business perspective. And that really helped, I think, a lot of those people to see the importance of what we were trying to do. And of course, from an educational perspective, then once we were talking to the people at Department of Education, it simply makes sense, the whole college and career readiness argument. There's an initiative here in Missouri called Top 20 by 20, and it's this initiative where Missouri wants to be in the top 20 performing states in the union by the year 2020. And so we talked about the benefits of language acquisition and language learning that has on the overall development of a student's intelligence and brain development, and how that could help to push us in that direction. And that was another argument that we made to help people make the decision.
You really have to make a multifaceted argument because there are so many different audiences and stakeholders and decision makers that need to be influenced and convinced. So coming at it from a fiscal point of view, coming at it from a futures, this is all about jobs point of view, and growing the next generation of workers. It's very, very important, and sometimes can be overlooked because we're all educators, and I think we understand the inherent cultural and cognitive values that come with the Seal of Biliteracy and being multilingual, but it's always so important to tie it back into the practical aspects for your state. So the last question I got for you, Chris, I'm gonna let you off the hook, was this is sort of done now. Now you're getting into the process of really, building some roots and going through the policy process. Ask you one question: who's taking the credit? Who has said this was me, and how have you approached that?
Yeah, so the way that we've approached it in the state is, obviously we knew that this was happening back on October 7th. I got the phone call and we were really excited about it. And we wanted to tell the world, but we didn't, because we were waiting for the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education to send out their press release. Once they sent out their press release, then we were going to share it with the world. We did not necessarily want to take credit for it because we knew that if we did, that would maybe put some people off. So what we've been doing instead is we've simply been celebrating the fact that we've got this amazing opportunity for Missouri students. And in the end, it really, as far as I was concerned, as far as our state organization was concerned, it didn't matter to us who got the credit as long as we got the job done. And the students now have this opportunity to showcase their talents.
Well, I guess that's a good thing that you guys are called the Show Me State, because now they're going to be able to show you who's biliterate or not, right?
We're giving it our best shot, yes.
Well, Chris, I'd like to thank you on behalf of ACTFL for all the work that you've done and all the support that you're now giving to our community. So, hey, thanks for being on the call again. We really appreciate it, and I'll see you at the Assembly of Delegates, all right?
Yeah, we'll see you in a couple weeks. Thank you. You're welcome.
All right, thanks, Chris. Now we're just gonna move on. I think we've gotten a couple of questions since we've been talking. Marty, would you like to address those?
That's great. So while everybody's looking at the advocacy sessions that will be held at ACTFL, the ACTFL convention this year, just want to take up the question from William Davis in Arkansas about being an English-only state, and how do you get resources for dual language in that kind of environment? And I think you probably have already figured out from some of the conversation that we've had today that the issue of languages is right now resonating on both sides of the aisle. We're getting support from Democrats and Republicans for the seal of biliteracy and for the idea that multilingualism is important for the future of our children. And I think that it's possible, if you found some friends in your legislature who would take this issue and really work on it. And I know Bonnie's on the line from Maryland, and they had to go, I think, two times before they got the seal of biliteracy, and there were some hiccups there, but it just takes perseverance, and I think you can get through. We do have, I think Israel's on the line. In Indiana, they had some funding for dual language from their legislature. So it's possible. I think it just takes perseverance and really setting your case forward, as you just heard from Chris in Missouri.
Thank you, Marty. Like she said, I can't reiterate this enough. Language learning isn't discriminatory. This is a bipartisan sort of place to be at in education, and I just think it's really a pivotal time for us as a nation, and for us to really speak out on this without any hesitation.
And hi guys, it's Matt again. I just wanted to add one thing. Everything Marty and Trey just went over is correct and totally right. The other thing I'd add is really, it goes without saying, but know your audience. I, for example, this afternoon was in a very conservative Republican senator's office from the deep South, and it's when you talk to somebody in that position, you focus on things centered on defense, things centered on business, things centered on jobs. So I would just say, think about who you're meeting with, what their priorities are, and see if you can map your priorities in terms of languages to their priorities as legislators.
Thanks, Matt. Very important. Here, last couple of slides here. We'd like to remind you that early registration for JNCL Nicholas's Advocacy Day for 2018 ends on November 10th. So if you had not signed up for this amazing and transformative event, you really should. I've been there twice now. Marty's been doing it for a while. Matt and Jill accompany us on the Hill, and we go around and knock on doors and get our point across. It's a really, really fun time. Go over to JNCL's website at languagepolicy.org and sign up today.
And we look forward to seeing you at the ACTFL Delegate Assembly in just a couple of weeks. And thank you again for joining the call. We will answer any questions in email format to all of you that we haven't answered already. So thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you all.